I haven't been this confused about a show or movie or anything in a very long time. So let's just talk through Rings of Power. An epic drama set thousands of years before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power follows an ensemble cast of characters, both familiar and new, as they confront the long-feared re-emergence of evil to Middle-earth. The series stars Morfydd Clark, Robert Aramayo, Ismael Cruz Cordova, and Markella Kavanagh. Much has been said about the budget for this show, so let's just get that out of the way. So the first season cost Amazon $462 million. That's insane. It's the most expensive television show in the history of everything, like ever. It's kind of nuts. And Amazon actually paid $250 million just for the rights for The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the appendices that are included with Lord of the Rings. So that means no Silmarillion, no Unfinished Tales. Right. So these books, there's a lot of ground covered in these two books. Won't see it in this show. All of Rings of Power takes place in the Second Age, which is the least fleshed out part of Tolkien's world. It's a very sparse amount of information. Now, we got to see the end of the Second Age at the beginning of The Lord of the Rings. So that whole battle at the beginning where the ring is cut off and Sauron is defeated, that's the end of the Second Age. From what I've been able to understand, the story of Rings of Power is going to be derived from the appendices of Lord of the Rings, which is kind of like the last third of Return of the King. So yeah, the last third, right? But the problem is the appendices have a lot of things in there that have nothing to do with story or timelines or anything like that. It's genealogies, family trees, and, notes on how the languages were created. So I decided to look and see how much information is in there about, anything that has to do with story. And that is how much they've got to work with. Now, when it comes to the cost of the show, the money is on the screen. I mean, technically, this show is kind of amazing. Like, it is jaw-droppingly gorgeous. It looks beautiful. The way everything is shot, it looks great. It looks very cinematic. Like, if you saw this in the theater, like, some people were able to do, a day before the actual release on Amazon Prime, you probably had a great time, and you probably couldn't see anything that made you go, oh yeah, that looks like a television show. It looks fantastic. The score by Bear McCreary, which some people have said that I kind of look like him. But I think it's fantastic. I've been following his career for many years now, and I'm really, really loving his work here. And the theme that starts off the second episode was written by Howard Shore. So, of course, I think going forward, the theme song that we're going to hear is by Howard Shore. It's great stuff, and I think they've done a fantastic job with that. So, yeah, the sets are great. The scenery is, of course, just gorgeous. The CG and the practical effects, the mixture of the two, look amazing. They look really, really good. But then we get to the costumes, and I think that's where they fall short a little bit. I think the characters that actually kind of come off the best as far as costume-wise are the Harfoots, which are sort of like the precursor to the Hobbits. They just feel real. They feel lived in. They're everything about them feels accurate, like, or at least, what we can kind of extrapolate from what we've seen prior in Middle Earth. They feel the most accurate to me. I'd say the dwarves are pretty well done as well. I mean, they took a lot of design cues from what we saw in The Hobbit. So if you're familiar with the way things were kind of designed costume-wise and even set-wise in The Hobbit, then yeah, you're going to know exactly where you are when you get to Khazad-dûm. The elves, though, that's where I get a little disappointed because, the elves in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, they sort of feel a bit ethereal. They're immortal, and they're supposed to be like the top, right? Like the top of the food chain. Like, not really food chain, but you know what I'm saying. They're the most amazing. They're almost angelic, the way that they move, the way that they look. And honestly, I didn't get that. I mean, it looked beautiful. Like I said, the sets were great, but the costume design was a little off for me. The characters is where we get a little disappointed, I guess, maybe. Morfydd Clark as Galadriel. I liked what she did so far. Like, I'm impressed with her acting ability and all that. The problem is, character-wise, she hasn't really been given a whole lot to do. She's a little distant to me. And I guess for me, I just haven't found that hook yet that made me go, yes, I want to follow this character. Robert Aramayo as Elrond is probably got the most to do, at least the most interesting to do. His sort of quest that he's given, kind of, or task. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I feel like his was the most interesting, and I feel like his character was probably the most fleshed out. Markella Kavanagh as Nori, I found her to be extremely likable, like, for sure, but still not quite enough for me to be like completely on board. And again, the Harfoots, they come off as very endearing, but they're not. They just don't have that. There's something missing. I don't know what it is, but there's something just not quite there. Owain Arthur and Sophia Namvite, I hope I'm saying your name right, as Durin the Fourth and Disa. Look, I enjoyed them a lot. Like, I know that there's probably going to be people that are like, oh, well, this is not right and this is not right. But you know what? I had a good time when they were on screen. I really, really enjoyed their characters. But they're not like the main characters, at least not that we've seen yet. So it's kind of like, okay. Ismael, Cruz, Cordova, and Nazanin Banyadi. Sorry if I say the names wrong, but they play Arendir and Bronwyn, right? The elf and the woman that he appears to be infatuated with. I like them. Like, I immediately didn't have a problem with Ismael, Cruz, Cordova being an elf. Like, not at all. I immediately accepted it. And there are some very effective scenes with the two of them, and even separately in some action type scenes. But again, and I think that's the big issue, right? I mean, after 2 episodes, I'm not going to say that I don't like the characters, and I'm not like completely dismissive of the story or anything like that. I don't feel that connection. I don't feel that immediate drive forward. You know, the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings both. You say what you will about either one of them, but you know exactly what the goals are immediately, and you're on board because you identify with the characters. And I don't think that we have that in this show. There's no one that I can just grasp onto and say, yes, I'm following that character. I can't wait to see what happens next. I feel like after 2 episodes, we should be further along as far as like our, I guess, connection with the characters. And that's kind of a big deal, you know? And I feel like at this point, the hook of this show so far has really just been the name, you know, that it's part of Lord of the Rings. And I think if someone had never seen The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings and they watched this, they would go, what's the big deal? This is just another fantasy show. So who is this show for? And I think that's the tough question, because I don't really know who this show is for. I think if you're a casual fan of like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, as far as the movies go, you might see this and say, yeah, I might like this. This is kind of cool. It's kind of in the same world and it feels similar and all that. But you have to have a lot of patience, because I feel like we haven't gotten as far into the meat of what's going to happen yet. And that's just a little bit frustrating. I think if you're a hardcore fan, I mean, like me, you've probably already seen it or decided that you're never going to watch it because, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, I think if you haven't watched it yet and you're wondering if you should, just ask yourself this. What do you feel about a company, Amazon, coming in and deciding that they're going to basically write a fan fiction of what might have happened? And ask yourself if you're okay with that. And finally, for those of you who have never seen Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, in which case I'm not sure why you'd be watching a review of Rings of Power, but if that's you, maybe try watching Lord of the Rings first, because that's going to be your best introduction to this world and the world of Tolkien. So yeah, Rings of Power. Again, I'm really confused as someone who's obviously a fan of Tolkien. It's hard for me to know where I stand. I mean, I kind of I kind of like the idea of someone just getting to play in this world and create something that we've never really seen before. But I know a lot of people, especially those hardcore fans out there, they're going to look at this and say, this is not Tolkien, so why should I even pay attention to it? So it's such a confusing thing. It's hard for me to know where I stand on it. Like, I think it's beautifully made. I think the actors are doing what they're told to do. The writing is leading them on. I guess I just don't know why. So I guess that about wraps it up. I hope that you guys can stay civil in the comments. I mean, I know that there's a lot of hot button issues when it comes to this show, but again, let's have some fun. Let's not yell at each other and things like that. I mean, hopefully. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.